Micah Hancock with All Israel News. Today we're sitting down with Aaron Abramson, the newly appointed CEO of Jews for Jesus.
That's right.
So Aaron, you grew up till you were a teenager in the United States and then moved to Israel, if I understand.
Correct.
What made your family decide to make Aliyah?
So my father and mother were beginning to attend a Messianic congregation in the United States. My father visited Israel with that congregation. First time he had traveled to Israel. He grew up Jewish, hadn't been here. And so he came, I think it was probably 1988 or 1987. I don't even remember exact time he came. And I was probably 12, 13, something like that. And he felt something when he was here. It was hard to exactly describe what it was, but just kept simmering there. And so my parents started to talk about going for a short period of time to Israel, and they talked to us kids about it, like, hey, what if we did this? And we, as kids, when you hear, oh, go to another country, that could be kind of interesting, exciting. And so we did it. He came here. We relocated in 1990 and made Aliyah short after. So they've really been here ever since. And I was here for many years after that, until about 2000 when I actually relocated to New York. So it was about a decade.
So then you were here during the first Gulf War.
I was.
When Saddam Hussein launched the Scud missiles.
I remember those days, and I was at the time in the Mechina program at Bar Ilan University. I remember we had to carry our masks and all of that, and nobody knew if it was going to be some kind of biological warfare.
Yes, exactly.
It was quite scary, but after a while, everybody got used to what was happening, and it was kind of became more like life as usual. But that was a strange year. It was a very weird year.
All right. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your time in Israel and how that has maybe shaped a little bit your current role and your perspective on Jews for Jesus as an organization.
Yeah. So when my parents moved here in, growing up in the early 90s, and as a teenager, I was 15 when we came, really kind of figuring out what it looked like to be Jewish. I mean, we weren't involved in any sort of Messianic or Christian environment at all. In fact, it was actually an Orthodox Jewish environment that we moved into. And my parents became more involved in the Orthodox community. I actually attended a yeshiva for a year at this time. And it was a yeshiva in Jerusalem, kind of modern Orthodox. And I had lots of questions. What does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to be here in Israel? All of those kinds of questions. And I knew, I was 17 years old when I attended the yeshiva. I knew at the end of that year I was going to be enlisted. I was going into the army because my parents had made Aliyah. So I got really into that year and started looking ahead at my military service, and ended up being drafted in 1992 and served all over the country, but I was in southern Lebanon for a chunk of time. And during those years when I served, a close friend of mine actually was killed in the midst of the conflict, and a guy that I'd known from the yeshiva. And that really threw me into a tailspin. I was like, why are we here? Why do Jews come back to this place? It seems like there's no peace. I found myself, people move to Israel to kind of grow closer to God a lot of times. I felt like I was going further away from God. And I decided I wanted to leave after my service in the IDF. And so I'd been serving for 3 years, and at the end of it, I was saving up money and thought to myself, I'll go back to America. That'll, it'll be great, because my parents had been from the US originally, and ended up going to the States for a year. And it was during that year that I started to wrestle with some deep questions. And some of those questions led me on a bit of a spiritual journey that eventually led to me opening up the New Testament and really sort of saying, who is this Jesus? And when I began to experience light and hope and just love that I just felt was coming really from the pages into my heart, I was like, how come more Israelis who experienced what I experienced, some of the challenges of living in Israel all those years, and just the conflict and, serving the IDF and some of that, how come they haven't heard of this? And so that's what really led me on a journey to begin really volunteering initially, and then serving with Jews for Jesus.
Okay, wow. the majority of Jews across the religious and non-religious spectrum are pretty agreed on one issue. It doesn't matter if you're, secular, Chiloni, or if you're, Orthodox, Haredi, whatever, in that spectrum. They pretty much agree that, well, you can be Jewish and be any of these things except believing in Yeshua. What would you say in response to that?
Sure. Well, there's a couple different responses I would give. One of those is I'd say Jewish people don't agree on a lot, almost ever. I mean, we disagree on all sorts of things. You got 2 Jews, you got 3 opinions. I mean, that's something that I found when I was at yeshiva. That's something I find in the Messianic movement. We always, agree and disagree, and there's a peel. It's back and forth, right? It's a process. And I think there is a lot of that. But there are some interesting data points that I think in some ways are important to reflect on. Like Pew, for example, did something where they survey Jewish people in the United States and others, but they surveyed the Jewish community and discovered that 34%, I believed they marked this off on their survey that it's compatible to be Jewish and believe in Jesus.
Wow. Among
Jewish respondents. So when we say we don't agree on anything, you can't be Jewish and believe in Jesus, well, there's 34% that say, no, you actually can be Jewish. Okay. Now, do I believe that what I believe represents mainline Judaism? Well, who defines what is mainline Judaism? You know, and those people that say, hey, we all align around this thing that Jews who believe in Jesus are not real Jews, or that Messianic Judaism is not really authentic Judaism. Yeah. Well, they conveniently exclude Messianic Jews from that group. Yes. And so, again, it's a bit biased, I think, in the whole premise, I think is a little bit flawed.
So I have another question, because you mentioned that after your military service, especially after the death of this friend from your yeshiva, that it raised questions. Yeah. And that you did find answers in the New Testament, in the Brit Hadashah. How do you see Israeli receptance, or let's say willingness to look at the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, or Yeshua, Jesus, following October 7th?
Yeah, so that's actually something that we've noticed an uptick in the interest level and the number of responses to. We offer free New Testaments on our website in a number of different places. And I think we've experienced an openness, a receptivity to searching in some ways. And I think that's not just us. I was interviewed by another non-believing kind of secular Jewish news cycle. And they were also noticing that within the Jewish circles, they were having responses. People were seeking answers, trying to understand what's going on, and wanting to know if there is a God, and if so, what does he want from me, and what does this all mean? Right. And so I think that's what we've experienced. I mean, the first few months, right after October 7th, we saw, I think it was close to double the number of respondents asking for New Testaments. Wow. And so that's something that I think we're seeing that across the ministry. Right, right.
So you lived, in the U.S., then in Israel, and then back in the U.S. for a little while. How has the time you spent here in Israel, how has that shaped your perspective on Jews for Jesus as an organization? The international organization of Jews for Jesus.
Yeah, well, with such a massive percentage of the world Jewish population existing here in Israel, and Israeliness and Jewish identity in Israel is so different. It feels so different, and the experience is so different, that I think that it helps me, number one, relate to other Israelis in the rest of the world. Because in almost every city I go to, I meet Hebrew speakers everywhere. Yeah. So, in New York and London and Paris and all these different places we go, I always hear Hebrew. And again, that helps me as an Israeli be able to relate to them in a more direct way. But I also think Jewish people are growing up in not all, but there are many assimilated Jews. Yeah. In some ways, look to Israel to help them understand and frame Jewish identity. Yeah. And so that's something that I think has helped us in Jews for Jesus. I mean, in the early 90s, Jews for Jesus was North American. Yes. Yeah. And then as it's gone forward, we've really grown. And in fact, now our work in Israel is really one of our largest works.
Okay.
We've got a lot of staff here, Hebrew speakers, Israelis who,
Yes.
raised their kids and grown up here. And so I guess it's something that has shaped or reshaped how we look at outreach and ministry, and how we also think of Yeshua, who was from Eretz Israel, right?
Yes, exactly.
I think all of those things inform our understanding. We're not just a North American entity anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's really transformed, I think, how we think about ministry and mission and outreach and all of those things.
And as an organization, Jews for Jesus, like you mentioned, started as kind of a North America thing, and it really started with a lot of street outreach.
Yeah.
So has that changed? Are you moving towards more online outreach? Are you adding components of like community service? Explain a little bit about.
Great question. Yeah. So Jews for Jesus started and really was a group of activists from New York City, most of them, and they were Jewish, and they said, you know what? You can't tell us that we can't believe in Jesus and Yeshua. We're Jewish, and we want to maintain, we don't want to give up our Jewishness, but we also don't want to give up our faith in Yeshua and Jesus. And so that really shaped the earliest days of the ministry, which were very creative and innovative, but they took everything to the street, And you got to realize the public square in 1973, when we were launched, was really the parks and the street corners, and it still is. And so we have teams that still do that. But we've seen the public square also move online, right? And the dialogues and the discussions. So we've really built out a whole digital and online media component of what we do. And we see a lot of interaction. And one of the nice things about that side of the interaction is it's fairly anonymous. And so you've got Jewish ultra-Orthodox people and secular people, maybe people who don't want to be seen as interacting with somebody who believes what I believe, coming on our website, chatting. We have a chat platform, and we get contacts all the time, forwarded and interacting with us and asking deep questions. So those are some of the newer areas. I'd also like to add that we want to sit down and really connect one-to-one with individuals, because we believe that relationship is really the foundation where we're able to really show, what does it look like to follow Jesus, right? What does that look like? And so having those one-to-one interactions is so important. So we create all sorts of different contexts today for that to happen. And I'd say in the last decade or so, Jews for Jesus has really developed all sorts of different initiatives, whether it's art galleries and things like that, whether it's a women's shelter that we've got here for women who are homeless or, addicted to various substances or struggling on the streets. And these are just several of the different ways that we've been able to come alongside and say, hey, we want to serve our Jewish people. We realize they have a deeper spiritual need, but there are other questions and physical needs they have. So if we can not resolve the tension completely, but meet some of those needs, but also bring the hope that we have, then we think that we're going to see that real transformation come through those two things. And so that's what we've been laboring in this last season across all of our teams around the world. It's really thinking through, what are the needs of the Jewish community? How can we come alongside those people and meet those needs?
When another personal question, when you came to faith, because I believe you before that you had some exposure to belief in Jesus, so it wasn't a brand new. But did you on your own go and get a New Testament? Did you already have one? Did somebody, on the street or somewhere give you one? What was that experience?
I had several different evangelistic encounters. One of them I remember did not give me anything, didn't even really try to share the whole gospel, just was very kind, opened their home to me, and told me that they love Jewish people and that they had a heart for Israelis and that they were a believer in Jesus. That left a profound impression on me. That was one person. And this person was blind, and they invited me as I was a traveler just to come in and, use their home and take a shower and eat some food. And it really struck me. This was in San Diego years ago. And then another person, there was a kitchen in Haight Street in San Francisco. And here I'm just traveling around, and they invited me in as well. And they fed me and just really were kind and befriended me. Somebody else challenged me and said, Aaron, I think you're struggling to find answers to a lot of deep questions. And as a Jew, I can't believe you haven't read the New Testament because I think you're going to find the answers there.
Okay.
And I really was like, why would I find the answers there? So I think it was that coupled with the reality of, I don't know what's next for me. I don't know what I believe. I don't know, I've come out of the army and I'm trying to figure out who I am and process everything that I've been through.
Taking your traditional post-army find yourself trip.
Yeah. And as a result of that, really just sort of saying, okay, maybe I'm desperate enough, but let me see what's here.
Yes.
And I've been reading all sorts of stuff, books on Hare Krishna stuff and New Age stuff and whatever people give me. So that was a powerful, at the moment I opened the New Testament and started reading the Gospels, I mean, it was when people say, on this date, I read this, and for me, it was a process of several months. And during this time, I returned to Israel. And I remember sitting in Jerusalem in the park at Independence Park, Gan Ha'atzmaut. And I was there. I remember kind of praying, just like, I don't know if you're out there. I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know if this is true. But if it is, and I want it to be, help me follow Jesus. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I mean, literally, I had no friends in congregation. I didn't know what that looked like. And I also said at the same time, I have two very good friends. They're like my best friends. And if they don't come to faith, you have these naive prayers. If they don't come to faith, none of this is going to work, God. I'm kind of making deals. They both came to faith. At the same time. So it was kind of like one of those miracles that just happened. And then I couldn't put the Bible down. I just kept reading the New Testament. And I remember I was working for an Orthodox guy in downtown Jerusalem, cleaning windows and stuff. And he hired some guy who was like anti-missionary guy. Kind of worked alongside. It was kind of amusing. And while I was working, he was like, there's some contradictions here in the text, in Acts chapter, whatever. And I'm like, what's going on here? So I asked the boss, he said, I saw you reading the New Testament.
Okay.
So I brought this person to try to convince you that Jesus is not the Messiah.
Oh.
That's what you get here in Israel sometimes. It's different.
Exactly. It didn't work.
As a young Israeli, he said to me, look, I care about you. You're Jew. And, I'm worried for you. And I said, okay, well, I appreciate that. But I didn't appreciate you hiring somebody like that. Not telling me. So the New Testament was so profound in my life that I love to just give it to people now.
So another question, because when it comes to this relationship between Judaism and Christianity, it's an old relationship with a lot of not so good history at some points in times, but also a lot of shared ideas. What are maybe a couple things that you think both Jews and non-Jews maybe misunderstand about God? Especially those that aren't familiar with the New Testament as much.
Well, okay, so if I say from a non-Jewish perspective, I would say often especially if they're reading the Hebrew Bible, if they're reading something completely different, it might be a different story, but if they're looking at the Old Testament, as we call it in the New Testament, the Tanakh and the Brit Hadashah, and they're looking at those, and they're not integrating into that story of redemption the people and the place of Israel. The physical people, they still exist today. If we can't integrate that somewhere into our theology, it skews it. I think it skews our understanding of the gospel, and it skews our understanding of election and God's, his choosing us before we chose him, not because of our merit, because he loves us. And, all that picture is so rich, and you see it fleshed out with the Jewish people, who were not a perfect people. And yet sometimes in contemporary faith communities that are not Jewish, all that just gets kind of edited out of the story. And so you kind of lose that really rich history, rich people, and rich story of God. For Jewish people, I think often they have a lot of, in some ways, misconceptions around what do Jews who believe in Yeshua actually believe in? Why should I consider this for me? And so a lot of times they've sort of put the hand up even before they've even considered or looked or investigated for themselves. And I think that sometimes their misunderstanding as well is that all these Christians, these people who follow Jesus, hate us.
Yeah.
They don't love us and they don't care about us. And I think that what I've discovered is that there are many people who are reading God's word and they're saying, we love you.
Yeah.
We have a heart for you and we
Yeah.
pray for you. And when they hear that, I've seen people break down in tears.
Yes.
They just don't even understand that there are Christians out there that
Yeah.
think that because they're told something else.
Yes. Yeah.
They're told, Christians will persecute you.
Right.
Or, historically there have been things
Yeah.
that have been very hard, but that doesn't, you can't just say, well, this is all Christians.
Right.
And I think there are many Christians today who do love Jewish people and pray for the peace of Jerusalem on a regular basis.
Yeah. I do believe that in that sense, October 7th, here in Israel has caused a little bit of a shift in that thinking. And I remember reading, I believe it was on Arutz Sheva, which is, Orthodox Jewish. They're not friendly towards Christians, but it was an opinion piece. And the guy said, look, after October 7th, I believe that evangelicals have earned the right to say that they love us.
Yeah.
And for us not to question them.
Wow.
Because they're the only ones standing with us right now. The whole world is kind of turning more and more anti-Semitic, and they're the only ones, and they keep claiming that it's because they read the Bible.
Yes.
And so I think, he's just saying, I think we need to just say, okay, that's probably true for you. And so I think that there has been a little bit of a shift here in Israel and kind of recognizing that, okay, wait a minute, there is a difference. In how some people read the scriptures. Some people read and kind of just ignore, but some people are reading and saying, whoa, this is an important section.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in Israel too, I'm shocked at how often, when I was very new in my faith in the mid 90s, it was just shocking to me. Today it's shocking to me how the perception around Yehudim Meshichim or Messianic Jews in Israel's changed.
Yes.
It was almost either unheard of or seen as like alien and maybe very cultish and you're all missionary, whatever it was. And now there's a lot of people today who I think have encountered Yehudim Meshichim or Messianic Jews in Israel and have a completely different perception of them and their faith in Jesus. And they've seen, hey, you can still be a good IDF soldier. You can still, we actually want you. You've been faithful to what you've been asked to do as an Israeli Jew and whatever. And so that is one side of it. I think also there's been suspicion around that's been a bit maybe dismantled over time. And I think also sometimes with Christians and evangelicals, we see the same thing happening. A softening.
Looking towards the future a little bit, I know you just stepped into your role a couple months ago, but looking towards the future, do you see we're seeing kind of a rise in anti-Semitism right now in the world. Do you see that having an effect on the organization going forward in some of your focus?
Absolutely. We recognize that we have a foot both in the Jewish world and in the Christian world.
Yeah.
As Jews for Jesus, we get kind of both sides. People, hey, and I think there's an opportunity for us to help Christians to understand what it feels like today to be Jewish, to exist today in a world that in a lot of ways has really taken some steps backwards when it comes to treatment toward treatment of Jews and anti-Semitism and some of those views, and even within the church. And I've experienced that. I'm sure a lot of Jewish people have experienced it. It's shocking. I spent a lot of time in London and New York and other places. It's shocking the number of people who said, we've had things that have been directly directed at us, attacks as Jews, just because we were speaking Hebrew, because we're Jewish. And that to me is a scary new world.
Yeah.
And I think as a result of that, we also want to come alongside our Jewish brothers and sisters and say, hey, we're with you. We're in this too. We believe that God's going to be there for you and, continue to preserve, the Jewish people. I don't think it's a coincidence that Jewish people still walk the face of the earth today, considering how many groups historically have sought to, try to blot them out, and God's not going to let it happen. And so really there's an openness in some ways. And I think they also understand that when things get tough, in a sense, hey, I need all the friends that I can get. And so whereas in the past, maybe they'd say, hey, you're over here, we don't want you to sort of interact with us. I think today there's a far more open interactions that we're having with Jewish people. And you're also seeing who the Christians are, who God's putting this on their heart.
Yeah.
I'd say it's not the majority, but there's definitely a good number
Yeah.
who have come and out of the woodwork said, we care.
Yeah.
We want to see what we can do. And so actually we're about to launch something in Cleveland where we're going to be partnering with some different people to kind of stand against anti-Semitism and to bring both Jewish people and Christian people and some Messianic folks together just to kind of be aware of that. Yeah, and it's upcoming just in a couple weeks in September. So these are some examples of things that we're kind of walking forward in. We've been doing it in Paris. We've been taking steps in that because anti-Semitism there's been a real problem.
Yes.
And so really just also bringing those Christians out and saying, hey, this is the time to take a stand.
Yes. Yeah.
If you do love Jewish people and you have a heart for them,
now's the time to say something and do something.
Yeah, and your voice matters.
Yeah. All right. Well, Aaron, thank you very much for sitting down with us today.
Thank you, Jamie.
It's been a pleasure, and we just pray for future success for you and the organization.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
This has been Micah Hancock with All Israel News. Follow us for all the latest news from Israel.